He has worked with the likes of Robert Bly and Joseph Campbell. And truly one of the most humble individuals I have met. True humility is about seeing the light in someone else. And so without further ado, we introduce Dr. Stephen G. Post.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Hey, what great music. Oh my goodness. Incredible. And I love that translation of the Lord's Prayer. I'm going to bring that home, okay? That's great. I was very influenced by a man who loved unity and who was my mentor for 23 or 24 years, John Templeton, Sir John Templeton, an investor. One day I was sitting in my med school office in Cleveland at a place called Case Western, and I got a fax from Sir John, who, by the way, loved Charles Fillmore. Sir John had grown up in rural Tennessee, Franklin County, and Fillmore's radio show was broadcast into Atlanta, Georgia, and somehow it went haywire and it ended up in Franklin County, and a young John Templeton heard it, and his mom received copies of Your Daily Word, which she would leave, I think, very purposefully on various tables. She never told him to read it, but he was curious, and that was a psychologically wise maneuver. But he always had so much appreciation for Fillmore, for unity, and we shared many, many conversations about these things. So Sir John, he was eventually knighted. He'd written a book called Pure Unlimited Love. He felt that love was the energy, the fizz, the morphogenic field underlying all of reality. So he didn't like to email. He was, I think, a little too old for email. But he loved faxing. Sir John believed that the fax machine was the greatest #1 invention ever in human history. And he would fax me sometimes 6 or 7, even a dozen times a day. And, you know, you want to respond to a fax from Sir John Templeton because he was a real great philanthropist and really the only one on earth who was supporting things that were consistent with this idea of the one mind and of infinite love. So he faxed me one morning. I remember the sun was shining. I was looking out my window. There's a fax from Sir John. Stephen, we need to start an institute that applies all the most rigorous methods of research and science to the most important dynamic in the universe, which is love. But not just human love. To be honest, Sir John had some doubts about human love disconnected from the infinite love. You know, he thought that it could be unwise, it could be very narrow in its scope, myopic, if you will. He thought it sort of faded out of existence or sometimes even reversed itself into hatred. It could be impure. He really appreciated the experience that we are often blessed with in this life where we feel almost invaded in our consciousness as we're praying or meditating or just in a quiet moment, almost invaded by this power of love that we feel somehow isn't just from us in some simple sense. Maybe it's within us, but it's the love of the universe. So he faxed me and he said we should start an institute to study this phenomenon. And I faxed back, Sir John, what shall we call it? And he faxed back immediately, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, which was fine with me. But I'm in a medical school, and I do like Alzheimer's genetics research and things, and I'm kind of wondering what some of my colleagues might think this could raise a few eyebrows, and I was already raising eyebrows left and right. So I faxed back, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Research on Creative Altruism, because altruism is a really dry, sciencey thing that even evolutionary biologists like to talk about in terms of beehives and worker bees, stinging and dying and so forth. So I faxed that to him, and he faxed back, no, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million, which was really interesting. I'd not gotten a fax like that, okay? So I faxed back quite quickly, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. And we founded this institute together, and we supported all kinds of research on things like spiritual transformation, about people's experience of unlimited love. We did a survey across America, a randomized survey of adults, 5,000 of them, 18 and older. And we asked them, have you had this experience where you just felt filled and invaded by a love that just kind of surprised you and left you different than you were before? And we found out that 80% of individuals, I'm sure in Canada it's more because I love Canadians and they're so loving. There's got to be something happening up here. It's so phenomenal, actually. It's so, this is my third trip to Vancouver, and every time I'm so impressed by everybody here. But 80% said at least once they'd had that kind of an experience. 40% said they'd had it several times. 20% said they had it quite frequently, and there was a 10% group that said, well, they kind of feel that way constantly, right? And just so you have a little sense of what kind of an experience I'm trying to get at here, a lot of you have heard of the great poet Wh Auden, yeah? A tremendously spiritual, mystical poet. So here's a little passage from Wh Auden that he wrote in 1940. One fine night in June 1933, meditate on this a little bit, really internalize it. It's so thrilling. I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man, like your musical group here. Okay. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had any one of us a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded. What a metaphor. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. A power, though I consented to it, it was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. I was also certain, though the conversation continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my 3 colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I was able later to confirm this. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends, but I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value, and I rejoiced in it. So I don't know if some of you have ever had experiences like this. I'll tell you one, it's not in the book, but I teach in a medical school. I've taught in medical schools for 30 years, U of Chicago, U of Michigan, 20 years, Case Western Med, and now in Stony Brook in New York. And even though it's not my formal role, most of the students and faculty kind of show up at my door when things are difficult for them. And so I do a lot of informal pastoral care. And there was a young Korean medical student named Janiper, and she was really having a struggle adjusting to the culture around her because most of the students came from more well-to-do backgrounds, and she came from a very poor background, lived in a single bedroom apartment somewhere in Queens along Northern Boulevard, and it was just a real stretch. She was also a member of a very intense Korean evangelical street church. That was how she grew up. That was all she had. That's all she knew. So it was hard for her. So she shows up in my office, and I'm listening to her, and I'm very preoccupied. You know, I'm like everybody else. I'm running from point A to point B. I'm like a victim of chronological time, you know. By the way, Fillmore said that the best time for you in unity is not chronos, but kairos. That's called divine time. That's when you lose all sense of time and place, and you're just in the moment in this very profound way. That's kairos, and that's God's time. That's where you find God, not when you're just busy running away. My wife is from Kyoto, Japan, and she teaches me a lot of Japanese symbolism. So when I'm not really very attentive to her, she shows me the Japanese symbol for busy, which is a heart with a line drawn through it, meaning no heart, okay? So I'm aware of that. But anyway, I'm sitting there with Janiper, and I'm not feeling like I have the time or the energy to be particularly attentive to her, and I thought, you know, I'll just ask her maybe to email me and make an appointment later on in the week. Sitting in my office, and believe it or not, I feel, literally feel this energy over my right shoulder. There was nothing physically there that you could see, but I just felt this energy. And it just was pure love. It was pure, unlimited love. What the mystics talk about. Fenelon and Madame Guyon and Fillmore, Charles and Myrtle. That's what they talked about. And I just felt it was so powerful. And then I turned around toward Janiper and I just cleared the decks. And I became completely mindful. You know, I was no longer going to be distracted by my schedule or anything that I knew was coming up in the next hour or 2 or 3 or 4. And I was just completely focused on her. And it turns out that she was really struggling. She had to leave medical school, and she went back to Queens. But I visited her about every month. I actually drove all the way from Stony Brook into New York, met her at a Korean tea shop, and gave her writing projects so she could journal and reflect. And she came back. She got through medical school. Then she went to do her residency in Connecticut, and that was very difficult for her. So I took the ferry over the Long Island Sound and visited her in Hartford and was really there to help her. And now she has a really successful career in preventive medicine. She's married, and she's very, very happy. But I would only have done that if I would only have done that because I had that profound experience. And it was so palpable and so memorable that I'll never forget it. Now, if I talked with my colleagues, okay, that would be a real challenge if I talked loosely about these things. But when I talk with the right people about these experiences, it really disinhibits them and allows them to kind of share their moments of depth. And that's really, really important. So we studied all these things, and we did all kinds of wonderful projects together, and we had big international conferences, in one case with 1,000 people from 40 different countries, and they were practitioners of unlimited love. Jean Vanier from L'Arche, who was a great friend of mine for many years, he was there talking about how spirituality was at the core of the L'Arche community. and other people who would astonish you were there. Matthew Ricard came from his place in Nepal. And we had 30 great scientists, neurologists, sociologists, cultural anthropologists, listening to these incredible exemplars who all had to have experienced powerfully this higher love. Not as an abstraction, but as something they absolutely, confidently had experienced at some point in their life. At one point or maybe other points as well. Talk about humility. Jean Vanier was the most humble man I ever met. And then we had spiritual philosophers, we had theologians, we had all kinds of great spiritual minds, many of whom you would recognize. They were there too. And the whole focus was to understand what's going on with these kinds of transformations. And the results, well, more than 100 books and probably 500 articles in peer-reviewed journals, and Dr. Oz and Oprah, and actually 4,000 newspaper articles, and many, many such things, because we had confidence. By the way, when Sir John died, Sir John, unity meant so much to him, so I can't resist mentioning him. He died in 2008. He was in Nassau. And a couple of weeks before he died, I get a phone call from his son, Jack Templeton, who was a pediatric trauma surgeon at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP. And I pick up my cell phone. Hey, Stephen, it's Jack. Dad, okay, meaning Sir John, Dad is on his bed and he's dying. And, you know, he's written some books in his life, and he wants to write one final book, but he doesn't have time to do it. I mean, he's only got a couple of weeks left. And he wants you to do it, and I was totally shocked. I said, Jack, are you kidding? How could I possibly do that? And Jack said, well, he thinks that you can present his ideas and be true to them and bring them to a different level of integration and depth. And I said, well, I'm really flattered and I'm grateful for his confidence, but boy, this is a big job. Does he have a title? So Jack said, yeah, he does. Title. Ultimate reality is unlimited love. He wants quantum physics, he wants spirituality, he wants it all together in one big smorgasbord that's beautiful and tells the world who he really is. So I said, Jack, I guess I'll give it a try if he wants it, because I'm loyal to my mentor and he was dying. But I said, do you think he could put a question mark in the title? It would take a little pressure off me, you know. So he said, give me a minute. So about 3 minutes later, he's on the phone again. Yeah, I talked to Dad. He says it's okay to use the title, Is Ultimate Reality Unlimited Love? ? And I felt good. And I did write that book over a period of several years, and it became a kind of benchmark for the Templeton Foundation. And it was important because, you know, people shy away from these ideas, these real ideas of a higher love that we're singing about. They get scared of it. They think people will feel that they're a little bit loony, that they've lost their rationality and the like. And Sir John just wanted something that would hold fast loyally to what he really believed. And all of that came from unity. And I just want to acknowledge that. So just on a related point, something that I actually find described in the presentation that I'm giving right now, I do want to talk for just a minute about the giver's glow. Now, will you interrupt me if I go too long? 5 minutes? Okay. So when I think of love, I use a definition that doesn't draw on Greek or Sanskrit or any archaic languages, all of them of great interest. I was influenced by a psychiatrist at the University of Chicago by the name of Harry Stack Sullivan. And this is how he defined love. He said, when the happiness and the security of another is as real to me as my own, I love that person. Can I try that again? Okay. When the happiness and security of another is as real to me, sometimes he said as meaningful to me, but as real to me as my own, I love that person. Now think about it. There's still an I in the equation, right? But it's an I that shifted from, I'm the center of the universe and I only relate to people to the extent they contribute to my narrow, silly little agendas. Otherwise, I cast them off. It's a shift from I, it to I, thou, Martin Buber would say, where you really recognize at this deep, profound, mystical level. Buber was a mystic. Namaste. I honor the divine in you and you honor the divine in me. He was a Jewish Kabbalistic mystic, so he didn't use the word namaste, but that's basically what he meant. And if you reflect on it just a little bit from your everyday experience, when you're looking over the crib of a newborn child, you feel that their happiness and security is every bit as real and meaningful to you as your own, right? When you're just getting together maybe tonight at Starbucks down the road here with an old friend who's lost a spouse, that definition really works. When you think about people who have a special sense of care for a given constituency, Jean Vanier, we went up north of Paris to the farm and spent weeks with Jean. And I'd started actually 3 LARCH centers in the United States over the years, the most recent one in New York. And, Jean just had such a feeling for these people with these developmental cognitive disabilities. It was absolutely palpable. And it was God's gift to his heart and his life. What a great Canadian. He felt that kind of love for these sorts of people. Dame Cicely Saunders, who had won also, like John did, the Templeton Prize, she had this feeling for people who were dying. We did a conference at MIT in 1999, and Sir John was there. And at this conference I mentioned, one of the speakers was Dame Cicely Saunders, and she invented the word hospice. A lot of you work in hospice. You know a lot about it. It's in the textbooks, but you don't know who founded it or why she founded it. She had a mystical experience not unlike the one I just described, okay? And if you go to London, her work is in all the spiritual bookstores. She just had this vocation, this calling to care with deep love. So she gave the dinner speech. And she said, I'm 80 years old. I still go into St. Christopher's Hospice. That was the first hospice in the world. She founded it. She invented the term because in ancient Europe, when you were traveling over the hills and valleys, you could spend the night in a hospice, which was usually just a resting area connected with a convent or whatever it might be. And she said, dying is a journey. Dying is a journey. So I'm going to appropriate that word. That's where hospice came from. What an incredible bundle of energy. She started hospices all over the world. And she said, as the title of her talk, I can never retire. She said, I still in the morning, I'm 80 years old, I go into St. Christopher's and I change bedpans. Because she'd been a nurse. She only became a doctor because everybody was giving her grief since she thought maybe you don't have to die with a tube in every orifice, natural and unnatural. So she went and got an MD degree just to make her point. But she said, I sit and I change bedpans. And she said, I appreciate the opportunity. It's a gift to be able to do this for a person who is dying. And then she said, I sit on the end of beds and I ask individuals, okay, what has been the most meaningful, loving thing in your life? She would often say that when people are dying, everything else disappears. How much money you got in the bank, how many Mercedes-Benz you got, color TVs, whatever. That's not really relevant. The only thing that really matters is who were you able to love and who was able to love you, right? So she called this dignity therapy. They actually practice it in many places in Canada. And she would ask, what is it that really was most meaningful and loving in your life? And then she would just listen. And she said, listening is a really important expression or modality of love. And she said, when you listen to people, it just brings so much joy to their lives. And so it's beautiful stuff. But she was called by God to do hospice. And she complained. She said, the textbooks, in the clinical social work textbooks, they want to know what I did. Yeah, that's good, but they don't have any interest in why I did it. Why I did it. And that's like hush hush. So you could talk of, Paul Farmer, who's a great physician. Everybody knows Mountains Beyond Mountains. I've known Paul for many years. Paul grew up on the bayou in a very spiritually oriented, kind of Catholic family. He got to Duke University as a 17-year-old, and his nickname within 2 weeks was St. Paul. Okay? And his life is just a testimony to his spiritual experiences in his adolescent years. And so we need to take these experiences to heart, and they're so powerful, they shape whole lives. And I'm veering wildly from my notes, which have become completely irrelevant. But, I would give you some scientific facts about why it's good to be good and how people in general, when they help others, they contribute to the lives of others, they feel happier in a meaningful and deep sense, not just this sort of giggly, chirpy stuff. They feel healthier, and they are healthier. Typically, there are lower rates of depression. There are many hospitals now that actually do interventions with volunteerism, for example, in adolescent psychiatry or in geriatric clinics in San Diego and San Francisco. So it's not just get Meals on Wheels, but how can you find a meaningful organization that you can volunteer for, say just 2 or 3 hours a week, right? And that will probably do more for you than anything else. So this is really making its way into mainstream medicine, thanks to our work, because we studied all this so intensely for so long. Just on this point, so when I got to Stony Brook, this is a funny story. I did not want to leave Cleveland, Ohio. At heart, I'm a Clevelander. We'd raised our family there in Shaker Heights, which is an inner ring suburb, and that was where my friends were. But I was lured away by the president of this university, who said, if you come here, you can start a program that will teach medical students and clinicians empathy and listening and compassionate care techniques. And we've done that pretty well with all kinds of innovative things that have made the New England Journal of Medicine and the Canadian Medical Journal and so forth. And we've been recognized for it. But I had cold feet. I didn't want to leave home. Home matters. But the president called me, and she said, Shirley Kenny, she said, Governor Spitzer is going to be very helpful to you. Governor Spitzer of New York. So we sold the house. We packed everything in these big trucks. We drove on Route 80 east over the George Washington Bridge to Stony Brook, which is on the North Shore of Long Island, looking out over Connecticut. We were in the Three Village Inn. It's a terrible thunderstorm. The thunder's so loud, the lightning's so wild, the rain is so harsh. And my son, who's 12 at the time, is getting texts from home from his buddies who were saying, where are you for soccer practice? Oh my God. And my wife is suddenly realizing, what have we done? We talked about it in the abstract, but now it was real. It was real. And so it was the worst night of my life. Talk about a low point. I mean, this is where Romans 8 comes into play. I mean, I almost lost confidence in the higher power's ability to turn what was really palpably a bad situation into something wonderful. How could we expand the canvas? So I did what any guy would do. I said, I'm going to go out and get some pizza. I couldn't, there's nothing else I could do. So I went out, we had Toyota Highlander, and I went out on this road, 92 And I found this pizza place called Little Joe's Pizzeria, and I went in there. And there were 2 newspaper articles in the foyer on the rack. One was the New York Post. It was a picture of Governor Spitzer, and it said, "Governor no more." And it was a picture of him in his underwear, his suspenders and his socks, because they'd gotten rid of him since he'd been hanging around too many hotels late at night with questionable relationships. And to make it even worse, he was using the taxpayer dollar. So governor no more. And so that was finished. Okay, I realized, okay, I'm not going to do all the things I wanted to do. And then there was some cub reporter from this newspaper called the Three Village Herald, which is like the North Shore of Long Island. And somehow or another, she'd gone online and she found out that in addition to teaching in medical schools and doing research, especially on Alzheimer's, that I was really into this unlimited love theme and this kind of unity type stuff with Sir John. So she interviewed the dean of the medical school, Richard Fine, he's a famous pediatric kidney transplant surgeon. And he was kind of surprised by it. He said, "Well, we didn't really hire him for unlimited love." This was I'm telling you this because the only article on the front page of the Three Village Herald was, "Now you're going to get a smile. Unlimited love comes to Stony Brook." And it's raining like hell, and the lightning and the thunder. My ears are breaking. And there I got Governor Spitzer and this one article. And so boy, talk about, bad things and good things and the divine power mixing them together in some incredible gestalt. So somehow or another they come out good. It tested my faith. It tested my faith. They even talked to my department chair. She was good. She said the same thing. So my first day at work, I called the president of the university, Shirley Kennedy. I said, "Shirley, what did you think of that article in the Three Village Herald?" She said, "Well, I got some phone calls." "Oh, who called you?" She said, "Well, I got a lot of calls from emeritus professors." And I said, "Well, what did they ask you?" And she said, "Well, they wanted to know, what kind of love are we talking about?" They were male professors. She said, male emeritus professors. "What kind of love are we talking about?" And then I went up the escalator in the med school, and there was this guy who looked like Mr. Clean. He had, big burly arms, and he was standing at the top of the escalator looking down, and I was maybe just, 2/3 of the way up, and he was staring at me, and I couldn't figure it out. This guy was a world-famous biochemist, and he said, "Are you Dr. Post?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And then he said, "Are you going to save us?" And this is like a completely non-spiritual, the metaphysic of the scientific community, total materialism there. And I said, "Well, no, sir, I'm not sure I'm going to do that, but I'm glad to meet you." We shook hands, and we became friends eventually. But it was an expansion of the campus, because eventually we did really, really well, and we were even recognized nationally. And we have more residents who were selected in their residency programs to become chief residents than any other medical school in America. And it's because people recognize that we emphasize the skills of communication and so forth. So, in 2 minutes or less, you might wonder, how did I sort of get into this, and how did I ever meet a guy like Sir John? Because Sir John was a totally influential person in my life. He even had me go to Kansas City, Missouri, and give a sermon in about 2002 at the big original Unity Church there, which is, I don't know if it's still a Unity Church, but it's quite beautiful and has a great collection of Fillmore's writings, but also Hindu writings and Buddhist writings and all kinds of things. And there's a stained glass window that just says the word love up above, That was great. So, in a nutshell, I was a young kid from New York, and I went to a boarding school. I call it an expensive orphanage. A boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire called St. Paul's. That's why I sometimes quote St. Paul. And when I was 15, I loved spiritual classics. I would walk through the beautiful fall leaves and I'd be reading Plotinus or Emerson's essay on the Oversoul, which I loved because everyone thought it was a great literary piece, but for me, it was true. We're all part of this one mind, this one Oversoul, and we participate in it. And there aren't many minds, but there's one mind, and we all have the gifts. Sir John once wrote a Christmas card to everybody he knew. This is about 1959 or 60. And it had one brief passage. It said, "Do you realize that God gave you your mind?" Kind of blew a lot of people around because he was in the investing community. It was kind of shocking. But he was willing to do things like that. So I was 15, and I was not a big dreamer, and I didn't believe in angels and things like that. And I had a dream, and it was really quite powerful. It was very early in the morning, and I was in this kind of betwixt and between state of mind. I wasn't sure if I was really awake or asleep. And I had this image in front of me, this vision, and it was of it was a deep, misty, thick cloud, silvery mist, and it was leading out toward the west. And then there was the appearance of a youth with stringy, strangly blonde hair leaning out over a ledge about to jump. And then all the mist disappeared, and there was the image of a blue angel. That's why this is a blue cover. And in a feminine voice that was very empathic, she said gently, "If you save him, you too shall live." And I talked about that with a lot of my classmates. It was a recurring dream. Again, I'd not had big dreams like this, and I thought maybe it was just my mind. I was dyspeptic. I'd eaten a bad hot dog. Who knows? I'd been out in the sun raking leaves, working off my many demerits. But it recurred 6 times over a period of about a year. So this was a really interesting episode for me in adolescent spirituality. And I felt invaded. I read that passage for a reason. I really did feel invaded by the dream. It wasn't like a dream of anxiety. It wasn't a dream that revealed some solution. It was just sort of a premonitional feel to it. And I just was surprised. So I talked with my sacred studies teacher, Rod Wells, who was a good friend of Alan Watts, the Buddhist Episcopal priest out in California. And we talked it through. We were really taken with it. And he actually drove me from Concord, New Hampshire to New Haven, Connecticut, first time ever, to visit Yale Divinity School. And I was 16 years old. And I gave a testimony about this dream in a class of about 15 students who were Masters of Divinity School people preparing for ministry. And the professor, James Dittes, was a famous Jungian psychologist of religion. And I told him about this. And we talked about it a long time. It's in the book. And then they said, "So did this make you act in any particular way?" I said, "Well, no, I'm doing fine. But I did apply to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, because it's out west. And I thought maybe that would be interesting for me." And they were kind of shocked because no one had ever applied to a school in Portland, Oregon. They all went to East Coast places. And so I put this on hold. 2 years later, Rod Wells got me a job in the Bronx, tutoring. I love tutoring kids. I did it with the French Canadians in Concord, who had come down south from the border. And I was going to tutor young people in the Bronx. And it was very meaningful to me. I told my parents about it, and I was headed for Swarthmore College, and they said, "You can't do it. It's too dangerous. The Bronx is too dangerous." And I said, "Mom, Dad, it's not too dangerous." They said, "It's too dangerous." And this debate and argument went on for about 3 days. And finally, my mom said, "Look, if you insist on this, we're not going to cover you for Swarthmore." And I said, "Well, okay, maybe I'll let go of it, but I'm really upset, and what are you going to get me instead?" So my dad was the president of a store on Fifth Avenue, W&J Sloan's furniture store. And he knew all the manufacturers across New York. They made lampshades, tables, desks, whatever. He said, "I got a job for you in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory." Oh my God. In Patchogue. So I for 2 weeks, I drove my dad's gray Mercedes 190, which has seen much better days. It was a second-hand car. He only bought it so he could look really hot when he took me up to St. Paul's, by the way. And they had their own little Opel family car. So I would drive this to Bill DeBono's lampshade factory, and I worked for 2 weeks, doing a good job. I was cutting cardboard in a lampshade factory between two very, very large Italian women. There was no air conditioning. It was sweaty all the time. And I had my Siddhartha book in my pocket. That's what on breaks I would read Siddhartha. So one Friday night, I said, okay, this is it. Actually, Bill DeBono reamed me out for messing up a few cuts on the cardboard. So I went east to West Hampton Beach, which is kind of a hangout, and I had some friends there from school. About 11 at night, I said, I'm going west, because I just feel somehow or another that dream we talked about, that there was something to it, and I don't know what it possibly could be. Maybe it was just a crazy thing, but I still feel that sort of lure to the west. Plus, I had a big push. You got to have a pull, you got to have a push. The push was Bill DeBono and what was going on at home. So I drove that Mercedes west, and I got through the Midtown Tunnel. I went up the FDR Drive. I went over the George Washington Bridge. I'd never been west of the bridge. And then there were two signs immediately. One said 95 south. Well, there was no south in the dream. Couldn't do that. But Route 80 west. I drove. About 5 in the morning, I'm smack dab in the middle of Pennsylvania, which is a too long state. And I'm thinking, I'm going to turn around and drive home. I'm going to do a U-turn because I'll have my reputation intact and I'll just go on and things will be normal. And I'll still figure out a way to quit Bill DeBono's lampshade factory. Just as I was thinking that, something happened. And I would consider it an act of synchronicity. So cars back in those days had generators. And when the generators blew out, all the energy in the car was gone in a second, split second. And so the lights were out, the engine had stopped, and I just managed, because it was a stick shift, to get over onto the right shoulder. And there I was. I'm in the middle of Pennsylvania near Lewisburg. There's no phone booths. There's nothing as far as the eye can see other than wheat fields for miles and miles. It looks like you're driving from, Detroit to London, Ontario, okay? Something like that. And I did the only thing a guy could do. I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment. It's in the book, actually. And I wrote a note to the Pennsylvania State Police. Please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. And I stuck my thumb out with my classical guitar, my Siddhartha copy, and $50 in my pocket. I got a ride immediately from a guy named Gary in a big white. I won't go into those details. I did call my mom, actually, from Lincoln, Nebraska. This was like 6 days later. And I called collect. Thank God you're alive. We can call off the Pinkertons. And I said, like any ridiculous adolescent male with no executive function, I said, Mom, why'd you call the Pinkertons? Didn't you get my note? I should have gotten slapped for that. And then, we figured out, they did get the car, and it was in the shop, and I was going out to San Francisco, and I was going to spend the summer with my cousin George from the Mission District, which I did, sleeping on his floor. I joined the Nam-myoho Renge Buddhist community, and I chanted with beads. I loved that over the summer. I played Villalobos in Hispanic restaurants and, made plenty of money. I was going to stay there the rest of my life. But I drew a really bad number in the draft. So I called the people at Reed College. I'd already turned them down that spring. I said, you got to open a space for me or I'm going to be over there and I'm not sure it's my kind of war. And they said, we'll give you a place. So this is where I'll end this. 7 in the morning. This is really about higher love. 7 in the morning. I'm in front of the Nichiren Shoshu temple. There's George, an old Japanese guy named Gus, several members, and they give me a Gohonzon, which is a Japanese scroll about this long. It's got all kinds of beautiful symbols about the one mind and the way we're really much more connected than we know. The Subtitle of this is The Hidden Mystery of Human Connectedness, which is really the basis of all ethics and of all goodness and of all spirituality. So I had my cajon on, and I took the bus on Market Street to Golden Gate Park. I walked across the park. It's quite a large park. And I walked up the Golden Gate Bridge because I'm headed for Oregon. It's misty. I couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of my nose. And there's a walkway, and there's a kind of a railing about waist high, and on the other side of the railing, I could see there's a ledge. I got to the middle of that one huge big span, and I heard some ruffling to my left. And I looked over, and I saw the image of a young man leaning out over the ledge, ready to jump. And he had this scraggly blonde hair. I'm not saying in every detail he was the person I saw in my dream, but boy, it was awfully close. So I was thinking, wow, you know. So I looked at him, and then he actually saw me, and he looked at me, and I said, I truly hope, I said it in an empathic, quiet way, I truly hope you're not intending to jump. And he was indignant. He started screaming those passages from Macbeth on life is empty nothingness out over the San Francisco Bay at the top of his lungs. Who are you to, you know, it was really quite impressive. And I said to him, you know, we did Macbeth at St. Paul's in Memorial Hall, and it sounds a lot more realistic when you're out there on a ledge about to jump than it did in Memorial Hall. But let me tell you, you know, we could all be on the ledge. I mean, I'm a little bit on the ledge. I said, everybody's on the ledge, and we're all trying to figure these things out. And so give it a second shot. Give it a second thought. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that. We had some interesting conversation that's actually in the, you know, very, very, almost verbatim recorded in the book because I never forgot these things. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I pulled my cajon zone out of my backpack. And I said, look, his name was Harry. I said, Harry, I have this cajon zone. He said, what's a cajon zone? I said, it's a scroll, and if I give it to you, it will change your destiny. It will change your life. It'll change your luck. And everything will start going better for you. And he didn't believe me. But I said, look, if you come over the railing onto my side, I'm going to explain all these symbols to you. And I did. I explained them to him with a lot of depth. And he was a very thoughtful guy. I don't know if he was high that morning or not, but anyway, he was really interested. And I said, look, I'm going to give this to you, but you have to make me a promise. You have to walk south on the Golden Gate Bridge. You have to walk across the Golden Gate Park, and you have to get the Market Street bus. And you have to get off at Market and Chenery Street. And I wrote a note, which is in the book, Dear Cousin George. That was my cousin George Lamont. This is Harry. He needs a shower. Please let him sleep on the floor where I was sleeping. Take him down to the Buddhist temple. Let him meet Gus. Let him learn about Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and take care of him, which he did. And so I said goodbye to Harry, and I walked north on the bridge. I got to the end of the bridge, and just as I stepped off it with my thumb out, there was this farmer's truck that came by, and it was an old truck, and the guy opened the door. A lot of trucks in my synchronicities, you know. And he said, where are you going? And I said, Portland. And he said, well, we can get you up there most of the way. My name's Dwayne Dill. Yep, D-I-L-L, just like in Dill Pickle. And this here's my wife, Dorothy Dill. And she said, hi. And I got in the truck, and then we drove north. And so that was an incredible episode for me. And I always wondered, because, you know, the mystics say that this divine love we're talking about here, that we're singing about, is beyond time and space, you know? And if you look at some of the great writers these days like Rupert Sheldrake, but many other sort of quantum level mystics who are making some interesting gains in this area, you know, they'll tell you that really high level physicists, they don't know what to do with the concept of time. They have no idea how to work with it. And before the Big Bang, there was no space, there was no time. And the Kabbalistic rabbis would say, when you want to really pray mystically and get in touch with this one mind and this one love that we're talking about here, do it early in the morning, because when you come out of sleep, you feel like you're beyond time. You could be it could be any time. You're coming out of your sleep, and you feel like you're beyond space, because you could be anywhere, right? And so that's when you want to do this. And that's because God ultimately is beyond time and space and place. And so that's when you want to meditate and pray and get in touch with your inner being, right? Well, I could go on, and I'm going to stop here. But my whole life, from the time I was 15, has been shaped by this adolescent dream. And there's a gal at Columbia University School of Education, Lisa Miller, who wrote a bestseller a few years ago called The Spiritual Child. And I was so happy she wrote that. And I'm going to do this plenary for them at Columbia about the Blue Dream in January, because it just shaped my life and everything I've done. And I won't go into it. It's why I quit a career in immunology and went to the University of Chicago Divinity School, studied with Campbell and Mircea Eliade and all these great people, because that was what the dream told me. So there is love, and no matter how much difficulty comes into your life, don't ever get off Route 80. I never have. Whatever your highway is, you can call it what you will. And just have a sense that there is a power for love in the universe that will take even the worst moments, including getting marooned in the middle of Pennsylvania or whatever, will take even the worst moments and bring something truly beautiful, who wants to expand the canvas, and that love goes with, not against, the grain of the spiritual universe. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.